Today, I want to tell you the story of how my best friend and I, we rock climbed a 1,500-foot route in about 12 pitches over the course of 8 hours in Frisco, Colorado, during the summer of 2018. Now, let's call my friend Austin, because that's his name. We're both from Arkansas. We're southern boys, and I was working in Colorado for the summer, and he flew up with me on my last few weeks there, and we had the opportunity to do an easy multi-pitch that was only about 45 minutes away from where I was staying for the summer. Now, being in Arkansas, we have had zero opportunity to do anything taller than about 100 feet. I think there's one multi-pitch that exists in my home state, and it's a 5'11" something called the Grand Traverse, and it's a traverse. So before Austin came to Colorado, I already started making plans on what we were going to be doing once he got there. Among the multi-pitch, we went mountain biking and climbing and El Dorado Canyon and all these other things, but at the forefront of both of our minds was this route that overlooked the town of Frisco, Colorado. It was called Royal Flush. Again, it was rated a 5.9 with some 5.10 variations, and I read on Mountain Project the hardest part of the route would be the route finding. It was also mostly a slab climb with the exception of 1 or 2 pitches. And in Arkansas, we don't have a lot of slab, so this was going to be new for us. I also don't really care much for slab, just due to how bouncy it is. I prefer something you can throw more brute force into. So this did require me to climb how I normally don't climb. And also in my head, I was thinking, well, slab's not as impressive as a 1,500-foot vertical wall of granite or limestone. But after we did the climb, I realized that wasn't true at all. It was a completely different beast than what I thought we were going up there to do. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the day of the climb. We wake up and hop on the couch and go to YouTube, and we start making sure we know what we're about to do. As far as, we've done top belaying before, but anything in a multi-pitch scenario we've never done. So we looked up a few hitches we need to know, like the clove hitch, just make sure we were down on that, which we ended up not using at all. We ended up using personal tethers, which does increase the chance of failure and death. However, it's a risk we were willing to take. But once we researched our YouTube videos, we set out to a gas station, and I bought a Red Bull and a few Cliff Bars with some beef jerky. He bought something similar. And then we started driving out to the crag. We got there about noon, and from I-70, Mount Royal did not look that big. I mean, yeah, it was big, but it was overshadowed by the huge mountain behind it. However, the mountain behind it was something more of a hiking mountain. You know, there's no climbing there. This was this weird spike of rock coming out of the side of it. But when we get to the base, and there's this bike path down there, when we get to the base looking up, we realize what we're about to do. Today we're going to go on an expedition into the vertical, climb Mount Royal, 1,500 feet. Austin, what's the tallest thing you've climbed before?
Like 80 feet or something
80
like
feet. We're going 1,500.
Dang straight.
Let's do this. This thing is massive. It's 1,500 feet. I've never seen a rock this big in my life from the bottom. It just gives me so much more respect for Yosemite climbers climbing 2,000-3,000 foot walls. I mean, the height and the scale is just unfathomable. I mean, when you're standing at the bottom of even Mount Royal, I mean, it's just like, wow, this is big. And we were about to go up to the top. I was hoping it would take 4 hours because we were starting at noon. We had a bit of a late start. However, it took about 8. And on Mountain Project, it was listed as 20 pitches. However, some people do it in as little as 8 with a 60-meter rope. We were using a 60-meter, but we did it in about 12 to 13, maybe 14. Didn't really count. But that's because we had never done this before and we were taking it rather slow. So once we find the first pitch, which actually was a little more challenging than we anticipated, we actually almost hopped on a 5'11 or 5'10 C or D. Fortunately, though, it was labeled at the bottom. It had a plaque that said the Royal Rocky Arete. So once we saw that, we shifted about 20 meters to the left, found the base of our route, and then began. I was the first up to lead. We took turns alternating, and whoever was following would carry the bag. In the bag, we had extra gear, our water, and our snacks for the day. And we set up the route. So I led the first pitch just fine. Set up a top belay, brought him up. It's a very easy 5.5, maybe even 5.4 slab climb. Again, not being a slab climber, there were some parts even on that where I was like, all right, you really got to trust your feet here. You really got to smear. As I like to say, smear city. So we're smearing our feet up the wall. Really don't have much handholds. I mean, there are some jugs up there, surprisingly, but in some areas you have nothing. You're just kind of walking up this, not steep at all, just gradual incline of rock for the first pitch. And that went by very smoothly. And then we get to the second pitch, where he would be leading the next 2 pitches on Mountain Project. We combined the next 2 of the original 20. And this is where things started to get new, because neither of us had done a multi-pitch before. We had not climbed above a set of anchors. And it was kind of nerve-wracking, to be honest, when I'm on my personal tether, which is hooked up to the anchor that I built with a nylon sling on the 2-bolt belay system. So I'm hooked into the nylon anchor, and he is also hooked in with his personal anchor system, and we're sitting there at the top, and then he has to unhook and go up. He's on belay off my harness at this point. However, if he falls, I'm the thing that's catching him. I'm his bolt at that point. I'm his pro. So that was a little nerve-wracking. Fortunately, though, we did complete this entire climb without falling. However, that does not mean it was clean. We'll get more into that later. Some sketchy stuff ended up going down near the end of the climb. But anyways, he's climbing up over this roof, and he mantles over. Again, it's a slabby roof, so it's not too challenging, but he clips into his first pro, and we're on belay now. We're good. Things as normal. He leads the next 2 pitches, and we're from Arkansas, and Arkansas, the bolting ethics there are pretty modern, because climbing there hasn't been a thing for too long. I'm not really sure about the history of Arkansas climbing, but the earliest I know of people climbing is the 70s. Just a guy named George Spencer out at a local crag called Darnell Rock. In Arkansas, we're used to modern bolting ethics, where it's like a gym. It's not that sketchy. You don't have to be that courageous or have a set on you to do it, which more on that later. But in Colorado, a lot of the climbs, fortunately, are a little more liberal in their bolting ethics. They don't sew it up so much, so to speak. So at one point on this next pitch, Austin ran it out about 50 feet. And that's because he skipped a bolt because he didn't see it. He was pretty off route at one point. But he had run it out about 50 feet. This is about 30 to 40 more feet than we had ever run it out before, especially in Arkansas. And I got to give it to him. He kept a cool head. I mean, again, it was easy climbing. I can't speak so much about his experience, but if I were to guess, if he did have any trouble up there, it was all just kind of him being slow and making sure he was making the right move, so he didn't take a 100-foot tumble down a slab, eventually hitting me, because it would have if the rope didn't run out first. We did have stopper knots, but still. He had to man up and run it out, because the thing is, once we started this climb, at least I don't think either of us, I especially didn't, and I highly doubt he did, but neither of us thought of coming down. That just wasn't an option. Once we started, we were going up. And after a certain point, descent via rappel would have become close to impossible, especially near the end when we were running out of daylight. So going up was the only option. So this experience on the Royal Flush, or Mount Royal, really just made us commit to everything. Going down wasn't an option. We just had to do it. So he ran it out about 50 feet. It went fine. I followed up. I led the next pitch. I had to run it out probably 30 to 40 at one point. And if I were doing that back at home or anywhere else in the past, I would have been freaking out. It wouldn't have happened. I would have just come down and said no. But it didn't bother me up there already 300 feet off the ground. It was something you had to do, or else you weren't getting back down. And it was fun. Like it wasn't bothersome at all. So that was cool. That was something. Again, it wasn't hard climbing, so this is less a physical achievement than it is mental. But it was a cool experience in that regard for sure. But anyways, we make it up, and there are about 2 to 3 of the original 20 pitches that aren't even roped. It's more of a short hike on third or sometimes even fourth class terrain. So we make it up to the first piece of third class terrain, and we sit down under this tree for a while, and we take a quick snack, and we're about probably 300 to 400 feet up, if I were to guess at the time. We didn't feel too high at all. From where we were, there were a lot of trees on this mountain, and I'll try to show you a picture, but we couldn't see the top. We couldn't see the head wall or the peak of Mount Royal from where we were, so we really had no idea how far we were up, but it didn't feel that high because we could see I-70, see the interstate, which I-70 made the climb more challenging. It was very, very loud, hard to hear your partner, and oftentimes, with the way the climb works, your partner would go out of sight, so Austin would be belaying me, and we tried developing a code where we would tug on the rope, but when we did that and then actually put it into practice, both of us forgot what the code was, so we just kind of had to guess what each other was doing. And me and him have been climbing together since we both started, so we have chemistry there. And I think if you're considering doing a multi-pitch, you need to either seriously sit down with your partner and discuss, what's going to happen if something goes wrong, because even on an easy climb like this, something could go wrong. You're 1,500 feet up at the very end. You could easily hurt yourself, hurt someone else if you don't know what's going on in your partner's head. Or on the contrary, or the alternative to that, I would suggest, just pick a partner you already have chemistry with. Make sure you're two on the same page before you do it. Again, this is my first multi-pitch. Not exactly qualified to give out advice. So, based on my experience, that's what I think you should do. But moving on from that, when we're moving on up from the first fourth class terrain, we hit this 5-7 pitch. My turn to lead. It's not as slabby as what we've been doing before. It's a little more vertical, getting a little more steep, and it was pretty fun. That was a very memorable pitch for me. However, when Austin was following, again, he was wearing the backpack, so he was a little heavier than he was when he was leading, but he had trouble. He really struggled, and what we discovered, I'm not sure how this worked out, but I'd say at least 4 or 5 pitches he led, maybe 3 or 4 pitches he led. When I was following them, I was like, man, I'm really glad I didn't have to climb this, because I don't know if I could have done it. And at the very end, we also discussed this, and he was thinking the same thing on some of the pitches I led. Maybe it's just because when you're leading, I'm leading with not only my climbing for me, I'm not just trying to get up this thing because I want to. I'm making sure my friend gets up there, and I can't I can't fail him. So that was definitely going through my head. And maybe it was that, or maybe it was just because, just luckily, those pitches that we both led fit our unique climbing styles. However, I think it's probably the former. Man, some of those pitches he led, especially some of the upper ones, I just could not have done it. Around the second, third, or fourth class terrain, we hit this second hike right before we get up to the head wall. There was this 5-10 variation of it that we kind of hopped on, and we kind of cut across that on over to a 5-6 variation, just because it looked quicker. Got up that pretty easily, but then once we passed the plaque, there was this plaque that was dedicated to the first ascensionist friend who died in Sweden, somewhere in that area of Europe. I believe he was climbing some alpine route over there. I'll post a picture of the plaque if I have it. But once we passed that plaque, there was this pitch that he led that kind of came out over this bulge, and it was this sort of traverse, and you had no feet. It was getting more and more steep here at this point. We're getting higher and into the more difficult pitches of the climb, and he struggled on it. He didn't fall or anything. I think he may have hung a little bit to look at it. However, he eventually did just crush right through it, and I remember specifically on this pitch, once he got up over this bulge, he was able to make a clip. I don't know how he made it, because when I was following, it was a very, very long reach. But the hands and the feet were just gone. I don't know how he made up the thing, but that wasn't even the hard part. You get up higher, and there was a sort of roof he had to mount and mantle. And good job, Austin. Good job if you're watching this. It was probably one of the harder pitches of the route. And if I had been up there, definitely don't think I would have been able to do it. So I'm glad he led that pitch. But that was an interesting pitch because, that's when it first hit me like, wow, okay, I'm glad he led that. But we make it up past that. We're nearing about a little over the halfway mark of the climb. And we hit the last hike, third class terrain, probably 150 meters of it this time, 150 yards, feet, I don't know. It was quite a ways. Up this really loose, blocky, looked like an avalanche had just been there. Talus rocks. Just we're going up this thing, following the cairns, following the trail marks, and we make it to the head wall, or just below the head wall, the apron of the head wall, if you will. And if you're not a climber, the head wall is pretty much the vertical part of the climb. The crux kind of last 400 feet of the climb. So we make it there, and we're at the apron, which is still a little slabby, and we're getting ready to go up. And there are people behind us, and we see people up ahead of us, up top, that are pretty slow. People behind us, though, we haven't seen since the beginning, so we thought we were making pretty good time. So I hop on this pitch. It's my turn. I got to clip my first piton. There was one hammered into the first crack up there, and honestly, I trust pitons more than bolts, if they all look like that, because that piton was bomber. Honestly, bolts aren't as good as you think they are. I had the opportunity to bolt my first route with Austin, and it's just a piece of metal hammered into a hole that you drill in. That's all it is. I mean, the bolt ain't gonna break. What's gonna break is the rock. But the piton seemed super bomber, so I clipped that. Moved up the pitch. It was fun. I should have led 2 pitches and linked them together. It would have been easy. It was just a 5-7 climb, but I had to really, for some reason I didn't, and I stopped and belayed Austin up. And this is when we encountered someone coming up behind us, and they were going fast, so we let them pass. We had to wait probably 30 minutes for them to get past us because they were climbing. We let them get pretty far ahead of us before we started. They were flying up ahead of us. We moved up the next pitch, and again, Austin led it. I don't know how he did. It would have been rough if I tried, I believe. Would end up in a fall or even a bail off the pitch for me. He did a good job there. So I follow up, and now we're at the head wall. This is where it starts to mentally get a little tougher to me. And he was stone cold the whole time. He doesn't get afraid. But in my head, I was like, okay, we're here. On my notes I had written down, this was supposed to be the 5-9. This was supposed to be the crux, and it's my turn to lead. So I'm a little nervous. I'm looking at it, though, and it doesn't look too bad. I'm not sure it was a 5-9. I don't know, because it didn't feel like a 5-9. I cruised right up that sucker, got up to this ledge. They call it the Yosemite ledge because it's similar to the Thank God ledge in Yosemite Valley or something. It's just a little ledge you stand on, I believe. Actually, no, wait. My bad. That's further up. Anyways, we're on this little ledge, and I belay him up. And we're waiting on the people above us to move up, but we're here, and I snapped this awesome picture. He snapped this awesome picture of me, and I snapped this one of him. And it's just amazing. Like, this is the point in the climb where we're on a vertical piece of rock, just sitting there. And it feels like we were actually doing something crazy, because we're above the trees at this point. We're above the slab, and it feels great. Definitely the highlight of the climb for me, especially after leading what I thought to be a 5-9 at the time. I'm not so sure now. I'd probably have to rate it a 7, maybe a soft 8 if I had to. But we lead the next few pitches. Nothing of excitement or anything like that. But then we get up to the Yosemite ledge I was talking about. It was rough. It was really rough when we got up to that ledge, because I thought somewhere I had made a miscalculation, and I thought we were almost done. I thought, the very last pitch is a scramble, so I thought we were almost there. And we weren't. We made it up to the ledge, and I realized, okay, we have like 2 to 3 more pitches to go. And mentally, this is where I'm like, I was slapped in the face by myself, and it starts to get a little rougher. So I'm looking at this next pitch I have to lead, and I'm looking down. The height didn't bother me that much, but it's still there. You're 1,300 feet up at this point. Looking around, the sun is starting to set almost. We got maybe an hour and a half of daylight left, maybe an hour. We're out of water at this point. We used all that up. I'm thirsty. It's getting a little rough in my mind. Physically, the climb's been great so far. Not hard at all. In fact, the entire climb physically wasn't challenging for us. We're not that great of climbers, but it was a easy multi-pitch. Mentally, though, that's where I was starting to get challenged on this pitch. And I couldn't... standing on this ledge just was freaking me out. Austin was there belaying me. He had an epic belay stance. He was on a ledge. Couldn't get much better. And I'm on the start. It's kind of almost a bouldery start. And you're up on a ledge, and you're trying to get your foot up on something that's faced the wrong way and go for a handhold that doesn't quite feel right. I was freaking out. I started freaking out in the first move. I was like, Austin, I can't do this, man. I came down a few times. I got up like a couple moves, and I was like, I got to come down. So I down climbed, which is the worst thing I could ever do personally on any climb. When I start down climbing, that's when I start doubting myself, and that's when I start freaking out. That's when I stop. I just lock up. And there are a few people that can get me out of this, and luckily he was one of them. However, he wasn't saying any of the right things, and I'm not blaming him. I shouldn't have been freaking out, but he was just like, oh, you can do it. And I was like, no, I can't. I can't do it. I eventually did make it to the first bolt, and I made it to the second bolt, the third bolt. I was making it up the climb, and I went off route between the third and fourth bolt. I went off route, and it was starting to get slabby again. I ended up in a really, really bad position where I was getting pumped. I wasn't strong enough to make the move to get back on route, and down climbing would have been very difficult. And if I fell, it would have been very painful due to how blocky it was below me. And it was on a slab, so it wouldn't have been a clean fall. In hindsight, I probably could have jumped out, had a pretty nice fall, probably about 30 feet, and just come down, left it at that, got a nice fall out of my system. But in the moment, I didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to die, but I thought it was going to hurt, and I didn't want to fall. The sun was setting, like I said. There was pressure on me to do this now. People were, at this point, were behind us. We had to go. So I sat there for probably 10 minutes in this awkward position, just pumping myself out until I finally down climbed and then lowered down. So on that pitch, it defeated me. I think not only did it deliver a mental blow to me, I think it was kind of a downer on Austin too. I think it's always a downer when your partner gives up and, doesn't send. So he gets up to lead the pitch, and he has trouble on the start, but eventually he gets through it, makes it to where I was, goes the correct way, clips the next bolt, heads up a little higher, and then he gets stuck. He doesn't know where the next bolt is. So he's up there for probably 5 minutes, and I'm talking to the people below us, and they're like, hey, you guys about to hurry up? And we're like, yeah, we're trying. It's getting dark, I know. But we make it up to he eventually finds the bolts, and we make it up to the final roped pitch. This is it. The final one. Which, again, wasn't expecting there to be this many. But this is probably number 13 or 14 for us at this point. So we get up there. Mentally, I'm expecting him to lead it, because mentally I'm done. I'm clocked out. We get up there, and he doesn't lead it. He makes me, metaphorically slaps me in the face and tells me, Tally, you got to do it. And I didn't like it. I wasn't mad at him, but I wasn't happy. And I was like, no, not happening. He was like, yeah, you're doing it. And later to come find out, he didn't want to lead it either, because it was a really sketchy looking thing to get to the first bolt. Your feet were bad, your hands were bad, the only good ones you had to throw for. And again, neither of us wanted to fall before that first bolt, because we didn't want to figure out exactly what was going to happen if your partner caught your fall on him. Eventually, I'm like, all right, I'm I'm going to do it. And at this point, the people behind us aren't directly on our necks, so I'm not too worried about that. We just got to hurry up and get this done before dark. The sky's starting to get a little dark. So I hop on it, and I'm glad he made me do it. I'm glad, because I crushed through that move. The rest of that pitch was easy sailing, set it up, belayed him up, and now we're at the very final pitch, which is a third class, honestly, it's probably fourth class scramble, but the crux of that was there was loose rock everywhere. So honestly, we're feeling a little uncomfortable going at this unroped because we're about 1,500 feet up, and it doesn't look like it's impossible to fall on some of this stuff. We also have a 60-meter rope to deal with, and rope management is probably the hardest part of a multi-pitch climb. It's a learned skill, something I did not bother to research before I went up. So technically there was one small pitch there, about 15 feet. I climbed up a little bit and slung a tree, belayed him up just over the kind of sketchier part with a lot of loose rock. And unfortunately, while I was belaying him up to that tree, there was a little bit of loose pebbles and stuff falling down from just the rope moving and falling to the people below us. Now again, these were pebbles we're talking about, but still, it's not a good thing when you're making rocks rain down on people below you. While it is an understood risk of climbing falling rock, you definitely don't want to be the guy that does that to another person. Unfortunately, that day we were, and this was probably the thing that went wrong most on our climb, were those pebbles. And then when Austin was coming up to me, he stepped on a rather large rock, probably the size of a cup, and we heard it move. We heard the ground shift. Honestly, it's so loose up there. I don't know how people didn't make rocks fall on us. But the ground shifted, and we heard this rock. It was almost as in slow motion. We just both made eye contact, like, oh my goodness. Both of us were frozen. Neither of us yelled rock, which is what you're supposed to do. And it went over the edge. Fortunately, no one was hurt, as far as I know. No one was knocked out, at least, because people were screaming at us, all kinds of colorful language, asking us why we did that, which I understand. I would have been mad too. But we haul-tailed out of there. We got out. Like, we scrambled up the rest of the way, got a picture at the top, and we ran down the other side of the mountain on the trails. It was supposed to be like a 45-minute hike. We made it down in like 20 minutes. We were running, which Austin is way more fit than I, but he was running out of breath that whole climb because he just came from 300 feet of altitude, whereas we're like at 9,000, 10,000 at the top. And I've been living there all summer, so I'm used to it. So he's kind of trailing behind, and we get down to the bottom and pack up the car, go get burgers, and drive home. Get a good night's sleep for mountain biking the following day. But definitely the most rewarding thing I did that summer. Couldn't have asked to do it with anybody else. It was a great experience. That was the account of Mount Royal. My first multi-pitch, 1,500 feet, whereas the tallest thing I climbed before was 100 feet. It was fun. It was fun, definitely. It's something I'm proud of. While it wasn't physically hard, I'm looking forward to my next multi-pitch to be even harder and more vertical, hopefully. But it was a great time. Glad to have done it. Hope you guys enjoyed this little story about the experience and the challenges I faced mentally.